Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is calling on grocery store heads to stabilize food prices while Canadians struggle to put food on the table.
It's not okay that our biggest grocery stores are making record profits while Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. So Minister Champagne will be calling on the heads of large grocers to come to Ottawa with a plan to address the rising cost of food. And we expect to hear from them by Thanksgiving on what their plan is to stabilize prices. And let me be very clear. If their plan doesn't provide real relief for the middle class and people working hard to join it, then we will take further action, and we are not ruling anything out, including tax measures.
California Democrat Katie Porter has commended the job President Joe Biden has done on the economy. Let's watch.
President Biden has done a terrific job on the economy, and I think this is a matter of just people wanting to sort of dream up what they could imagine for different kinds of candidates at this point. But the truth is, Joe Biden has a terrific story to tell on the economy.
But a new Suffolk University Sawyer Business School and USA Today poll finds that Americans trust former President Donald Trump more than Biden when it comes to making the economy better by an 11-point margin. So I think Trudeau actually realizing that this is a problem on the supply side, that grocery stores are the one making the decision to raise prices on consumers, that's a good thing. I wish President Joe Biden would do that. Especially when we see these grocery stores reaping record profits. They're not raising prices to account for additional supply side costs that they incurred during the pandemic. Inflation started with a measure of price increases with essentials, things that people were purchasing at the grocery store. And so we really need to go and address this problem at its source. Show us your books. Why are these price increases justified? Or are they doing it simply because they can, because food is a necessity? That's a problem. That's not a functioning economy for everyday working people. So it makes sense that Canada is starting with the grocers. And I don't buy Katie Porter's pitch here that Biden's doing a great job on the economy.
I agree that grocery prices definitely need to come down. However, even though profits are at a record high, we still see that the profit margin for grocers is only between 2 to 3%. So it's not like they're really jacking them up so much that they're simply doing it out of greed. I do think that there are lingering supply chain issues from the pandemic that would be better addressed by people like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as opposed to threatening to punish them financially, because we know what happens when we increase taxes on corporations. They pass that price onto the consumer. This is either only going to increase the cost of groceries for Canadians or Americans in the case of our country, or it's going to lead to greater shortages of goods, in which case people are going to have a difficult time buying the things that they need, just like we saw a couple of years ago, and this still persists today, but people unable to purchase goods like baby formula or going to the pharmacy and not having access to the medication that they need. There's really nothing good that happens out of trying to tax your way through an issue that's a supply side issue.
Yeah, I think Trudeau made a good decision to not say we'll definitely raise taxes, but we'll consider it. Because I think what we're seeing right now is with the instability during the pandemic and with the decision that so many companies made to raise prices or not on consumers, we saw that these grocers in the United States, if it's what you're saying is true, that they're maintaining the same profit margins, yet prices are going up, they're already pushing costs onto the consumer when they could be dipping into their profit margins to cover additional incurred costs. But what we're seeing is record profits without a major change in revenue, in incurred costs when it comes to input costs, which at the beginning of the pandemic, we did see a lot of corporations paying increased input costs because of the trucking shortage, because we had supply chain disruptions. And so they did have an additional cost of doing business. But when that went away, they didn't make changes when it came to prices. They didn't bring their prices back down proportionally. And so when we think about what kind of a policy solution would incentivize grocers to address something like this, in the case of the United States, I think breaking up the monopoly that corporations like Kroger ever have on the food supply and an increased competition in the market when it comes to grocery stores and grocers. When you have this major consolidation of where people are getting their food, you have that one major grocer controlling the prices of food. And we've seen the antitrust department of this DOJ under the Biden administration not be so active. In the case of Ticketmaster, they kind of said, we're going to do something, we're thinking about it, and then not much policy come out of that. Just a little bit of transparency in their pricing structure. They have to tell you what their fees are for and how much they are before you get to the point of checking out. They didn't do anything to break up the monopoly. That's what the antitrust division is supposed to do. So I think that might be a more relevant policy response that won't push these costs onto consumers who can't afford them.
Yeah, I think there's maybe an underestimation of how much the supply chain issues are persisting. There still is definitely a trucker shortage, for example. But I agree, a lot of the concerns have been alleviated in the past 6 months or so. And your point about antitrust is well taken. There's sort of a double-edged sword with the way that we purchase our food in America, where we have access to so many out-of-season vegetables and so much choice when it comes to the products that we purchase because of the fact that grocery stores have gone corporate. But at the same time, we are subject, of course, to their pricing schemes. Whereas if you were, had the ability to shop more locally or shop smaller, you would see that produce would come from local farms, which would reduce prices, reduce the possibility for supply chains to be disrupted so aggressively. And I'm definitely on board with trying to reduce monopolies in pretty much every industry. But the grocery store one is one that I definitely agree with you on. On this Katie Porter statement, I just can't believe how out of touch this woman is. And we've talked about this before on the show, how the Biden administration has really downplayed the economic concerns of Americans. And when we hear from the American people through pretty much every poll that's coming out that they don't feel good about where they stand economically, they're concerned that the economy is going to get worse. They trust Trump way more than they trust Biden to handle the economy. They trust Republicans in general more than the Democratic Party to handle the economy. That's something that should prompt some reflection, some self-awareness. And instead, the Democratic establishment just doubles down and acts like Americans are crazy or what they're feeling is not real or not justified. You even see the Biden administration imploring the media to make the case to the American people that the economy is better than it actually is. It's really a form of gaslighting of people who are there going through their budgets and making the payments, paying their bills, running the receipts from the grocery store. They know whether or not they're able to survive in this economy, and for their government to turn around and say, you're wrong, is ridiculous.
I think there's a pretty widespread belief among, members of mainstream media, among Democratic consultants, that the main problem with the United States economy is that there are things that cause instability that happen at the micro level that then grow into larger problems, but they generally start, at the point of the market, and things go wrong, and then it's the federal government's response or responsibility to address those problems. Rather, I would define the main problem with the instability, the constant boom and bust cycle that we have, is bad macroeconomic policy making. Time and time again, you have an administration get into office and just continue business as usual without changing anything or even questioning the reasoning we have behind the macroeconomic policies that have governed our country for the past century. And so we have a Federal Reserve that will raise interest rates in response to the kind of inflation that is caused by, as you said, a trucking shortage. What would resolve that is if we invested in increasing transportation, increasing our ability to move materials from A to B. And if we don't have a bank ready to give a business a loan to invest in this part of the economy, this sector of trucking and transportation and transporting goods, then Congress should use their power of the purse to give that initial investment or business loan. This would accurately be a precise measure to address the inflation at its root cause rather than raising interest rates and quelling economic activity altogether, which then causes more inflation in the long run. And so I think people don't exactly have their finger on the pulse here when this issue is discussed. But I think as soon as we get a president and an administration that understands the supply side of inflation, we're going to see, our federal government, Congress, the Fed, the Treasury, and the president be able to work in tandem to actually prevent these cycles of booms and busts that are just caused by bad macroeconomic policy. It's not this kind of reverse causality situation where you have the market creating instability and the government responding. They're creating the conditions for crashes and instability.
We're going to have to leave it there. More rising after this.